Hi, I'm Kat, and today I have for you a true crime case, a word in Romanian, and I will also be doing my makeup at the same time. So, the word for today is îngrijitor. 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 Well done, guys. You just said caregiver. In 1965, a 16-year-old American girl named Sylvia was tortured and killed by her caregiver, Gertrude Baniszewski, or Gertrude Baniszewski, plus her children and some of the neighborhood youths. The assaults occurred over 3 months before Sylvia passed away on October 26th in Indianapolis, Indiana, due to her extensive wounds and malnutrition. Sylvia was increasingly neglected, taunted, beaten, starved, cut, burnt, and dehydrated by her tormentors. Her autopsy revealed over 150 injuries across her body, including burns, cuts, and punctures. Through intimidation, her younger sister Jenny was sometimes forced to join in the mistreatment. The official reason for Sylvia's death was a combination of a head injury, shock, and severe malnutrition. Gertrude Baniszewski, her eldest daughter Paula, her son John, and 2 neighborhood boys named Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were all tried and convicted in May 1966 for neglecting, torturing, and murdering Sylvia. At the trial, the prosecutors called it the most evil case to ever come before a court or a jury. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gertrude Baniszewski guilty of first-degree murder. Now, I'm not sure how do you pronounce this name. Is it Gertrude or Gertrude? I don't know. Anyway, I'm just going to pronounce it Gertrude. It seems like it's easier to pronounce. So Gertrude was sentenced to life imprisonment, but she was actually paroled in 1985. Paula, her daughter, was convicted of second-degree murder and she was paroled in 1972. Coy, Richard, and John were convicted of manslaughter and served less than 2 years before being paroled in 1968. Torture and killing of Sylvia Likens is seen as the worst crime ever in Indiana and was described by an Indianapolis police investigator as the most sadistic case he had seen in his 35-year career. And this is the case in a nutshell. But how did we get here? Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January the 3rd, 1949 to traveling carnival workers Lester and Betty Likens. Lester and Betty already had the twins, Danny and Diana, and would have another pair of twins in 1950, Benny and Jenny. Sylvia, who was the middle child and the only child without a twin, was very close with her sister Jenny. Her sister Jenny had polio and she wore a leg brace. Polio is actually an infectious disease caused by a virus which can spread from person to person and can also cause paralysis. In those times, there was no vaccine for polio. Sylvia's parents had marriage problems and the children, they were often left with relatives. But Sylvia's parents also worked in a touring carnival, which meant there wasn't much stability in the lives of the children. When Sylvia was 16, her parents decided to get back together after they had separated, going again on the road with the carnival. In her teens, Sylvia earned money through babysitting, chores for neighbors, giving some to her parents. She was described as friendly, spirited, with long brown hair. She had a missing front tooth from childhood play. She liked music and she protected her timid sister Jenny. Lester and Betty didn't really want to disrupt the girls' lives yet again, so they decided that the children, they would be better off remaining in Indianapolis, Indiana, where they were living with their mother Betty. But being 15 and 16 years old, Jenny and Sylvia really needed an adult to take care of all of the children while they finished school. So after meeting Gertrude's girls at church, they very soon became friends with Marie, Shirley, Stephanie, and Paula. When their mother, Gertrude, agreed to let the girls stay with her while her parents traveled, the arrangement was very quickly approved by Lester, their father. Gertrude Nadine Baniszewski was born in 1928 in Indianapolis to working class parents. In 1939, when she was 11 years old, she saw her 50-year-old father die suddenly of a heart attack. At 16 years old, she dropped out of school to marry 18-year-old John Baniszewski, having 4 children together: Paula, Stephanie, Johnny, and Marie. Even though John was abusive, they stayed married for 10 years before divorcing. Gertrude remarried, but she quickly divorced again. She was living with her kids in a 2-story house in Indianapolis. She lived for a while with another man, but it didn't work out. So she got married to John again, her first husband, and they had 2 more children, Shirley and James, before their final divorce in 1963. Just weeks after their third divorce, by then 36 years old, Gertrude began a relationship with 20-year-old Dennis Wright, who was just a few years older than her eldest daughter Paula. They had a baby boy in 1964 called Dennis Wright Jr. Gertrude got pregnant again in 1965, but she had a miscarriage in April of that year. Dennis Wright Sr. then abandoned her. She unsuccessfully filed a child support suit against him. By 1965, Gertrude was living alone with her 7 children, aged 17 to 1 year old. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, 100 pounds, a smoker with depression from failed relationships. She was able to make some money doing some ironing, but she couldn't really work because she had to look after the children. Paula, her eldest daughter, had a job which brought some money to the family. Gertrude also collected child support from Dennis Wright Sr. and also her previous husband, her very first husband, John Baniszewski. But these amounts were very little and they were not so often. They were living below the poverty line. Gertrude suffered from severe anxiety, diagnosed as a nervous disorder, and she also struggled with asthma. Even though she was short of breath very often because of the asthma, she still carried on being a really heavy smoker. She weighed, like I said, less than 100 pounds and she seemed fragile and weak. On July the 5th, 1965, Lester Likens agreed to leave his teenage daughters, Jenny and Sylvia, with Gertrude Baniszewski in exchange for $20 per week for boarding. Gertrude promised to look after them like they would be her own. At first, the girls, they enjoyed the company of the Baniszewski girls. They had fun together, they talked about boys, and even shared secrets. But on July 11, 1965, the second payment to Gertrude from Lester was late. And Gertrude was furious. Initially, there was very little discipline or, anything bad happening in the household. But when payments started being late, Gertrude started beating the girls. She punished them by hitting them with a belt. By late July, Sylvia was punished by Gertrude again for unknown reasons. This time she got hit with a fraternity-style paddle. Gertrude would soon focus her anger mainly on Sylvia out of jealousy. She subjected Sylvia to beatings and starvations, forcing her to eat garbage. Sylvia was wrongly accused of stealing candy that she bought. Gertrude would also humiliate Sylvia over innocent things she would say about a boy she liked. Gertrude's daughter Paula, who was pregnant and seemed jealous of Sylvia, also violently attacked her. Late in July, Sylvia learned that Paula was pregnant. A few months earlier, Paula ran off with a married man and she was now expecting. She returned home, but Paula, afraid to tell her mother Gertrude, became furious when rumors began to spread around town that she was pregnant. Paula blamed Sylvia for these rumors, claiming that she was spreading lies about her. Gertrude became so upset about these rumors that she decided Sylvia needed to be punished. So she instructed her daughter Paula to hit Sylvia and solve her own problems. Paula hit Sylvia so hard that she broke her own wrist on Sylvia's jaw. In August, Sylvia and her sister Jenny were gathering some bottles and turned them in to make some money. When the other children told their mother about this, Gertrude insisted that the girls stole. Jenny, who was a polio victim and she wore a brace on her leg, wasn't severely punished. So Gertrude put the blame on Sylvia and burned her fingertips for having sticky fingers. During the same month, Sylvia's and Jenny's parents visited their daughters but didn't notice anything wrong. Gertrude got arrested in August of 1965 after she failed paying the paper boy. The family would go to church regularly, but it didn't really seem to have any effect in the home. Neighbors noticed that Paula was quite regularly hitting and abusing Sylvia, but no one reported the abuse. In September, the children, they started school. Sylvia worked in the cafeteria at school, which was lucky because at least she would get a meal per day, because at home she was being starved. Every day, Paula and Gertrude would hit Sylvia with a paddle, a leather belt, and other items. Gertrude called her a prostitute and told her that she must be pregnant because she messed with boys. Gertrude even told neighbors and Paula that Sylvia didn't have a period since she lived in the house because she was pregnant. But Sylvia was never pregnant. The neighborhood children visited the household, and very soon other children in the area started having issues with Sylvia. A neighbor girl kicked her in the stomach and Sylvia shouted, "Oh, my baby," believing what Gertrude told her about being pregnant. When 11-year-old Marie, one of Gertrude's children, cut her hand, police visited the house. This was in September. It's possible that Marie injured herself while punishing Sylvia. Johnny, Paula, Shirley and Marie, Gertrude's children, were all helping to whip Sylvia, and they even burned her with cigarettes. On October the 5th, Lester and Betty visited their daughters again and gave Sylvia money for shoes. They told the girls that they would return in 3 weeks. The next day, on October the 6th, was Sylvia's last day at school. Gertrude stopped allowing Sylvia to attend school for stealing a gym suit. She whipped Sylvia with a police belt, kicked her, and burnt her fingers with matches. She also whipped Jenny for stealing a shoe. After not being allowed to attend school, Sylvia was forced to live in the basement for being dirty, and she wasn't allowed upstairs. Gertrude began bathing her in scalding hot water, causing severe burns to her skin. The neighborhood boy, Coy Hubbard, would attack Sylvia as well. Coy was Stephanie's boyfriend, one of Gertrude's daughters. There was a false rumor spreading around at one point that Sylvia and Paula were prostitutes. Gertrude blamed Sylvia for the rumor and used a paddle to beat her. Paula beat Sylvia so severely that she broke her own wrist. She then used a cast to continue beating Sylvia. Gertrude falsely accused Sylvia of promiscuity and forced her own sister Jenny to hit her as well. Coy and his friends often came over to verbally and physically torment Sylvia along with Gertrude's kids. They beat her, burned her skin with cigarettes, injured her, and forced her to do humiliating sexual acts. Sylvia and Jenny were scared to say anything to their family or the school staff about the abuse because they were scared it will only get worse. After Sylvia's parents' last visit in October, Gertrude taunted Sylvia about them being gone. The girls told their sister Diana about the abuse at the park but didn't give an address. Diana doubted it was so severe at first, but when she later found out where they were, Gertrude refused to let her see them. Because of the increasing frequency and brutality of the torture, Sylvia became incontinent from distress And I think it's also been said that she actually developed some kidney problems because of the abuse that she went through. As punishment, because of her incontinence, Gertrude locked her naked in the basement with very little food or water. She was sometimes tied to the stairs, barely off the ground. In the weeks before locking Sylvia in the basement, Gertrude had increasingly tormented her. She would falsely claim that Sylvia was insulting her kids just to make them mistreat her. She challenged Sylvia to fight back and cut her leg when Sylvia said that she didn't know how to. The torture would pause when Gertrude would watch television because, of course, we wouldn't want Gertrude to, be interrupted whilst watching television and probably thinking what other kind of abuse she should put Sylvia through. On October 15th, a public health nurse visited the home after being informed that one of the children had open sores. The nurse spoke with Gertrude, who told her that Sylvia is the only one with open sores, and she ran away. The nurse then decided that she didn't need to follow up, and so she just left. However, this incident infuriated Gertrude, who, as usual, took her anger out on Sylvia. Neighborhood kids even paid to see and abuse Sylvia. Gertrude's kids helped restrain and gag her, bathed her in scalding water, and rubbed salt in her wounds. Gertrude and her son rubbed feces in Sylvia's mouth before limiting her water. On October 22nd, John Jr. taunted starving Sylvia with food. He gave Sylvia some soup. Sylvia was starving, but John forced her to eat the soup with her fingers while the family laughed at her. The only other food that was given to Sylvia at this time was feces from the baby's diaper and cups of urine. Insisting that Sylvia was a prostitute, Gertrude forced Sylvia to, insert a Pepsi bottle into her own private area on numerous occasions in October while the other children watched. Gertrude would let Sylvia sleep upstairs if she didn't wet herself. On one occasion, Sylvia got some water from Jenny before she fell asleep. The next morning, Gertrude found Sylvia wet, and as punishment, the kids made Sylvia insert a bottle into herself before Gertrude sent her back to the basement. She then called Sylvia upstairs and said that she would brand her for branding her kids. She started carving "I'm a prostitute and proud of it" into Sylvia's stomach with a heated needle. When Gertrude couldn't finish, because of course she was weak and frail, 14-year-old Richard Hobbs helped carve the words into Sylvia's flesh while Sylvia moaned in pain. Richard and Shirley Baniszewski then unsuccessfully tried to burn Sylvia's chest with a bolt. Richard was actually hanging around the house quite frequently with Gertrude, and some suspected that there was a sexual relationship between the two of them. Gertrude would later tell Sylvia that she could never marry because of the carving that they gave her. Gertrude even forced her to show it to the neighborhood kids. Other neighbors came over after school to have fun with Sylvia, and the children took turns in torturing her. Gertrude knew about this, and she even encouraged the behavior. At one point, Sylvia told Jenny that she knew she was going to die. The next day, Gertrude dictated a false letter about Sylvia being mutilated by boys, planning to eventually leave her to die. Sylvia was forced to write 2 letters that detailed her confessions to being nothing but trouble. She was told to write that she stole things, disobeyed Gertrude, cost Gertrude money, and numerous other lies. After she finished the letters, Coy Hubbard hit her with a broomstick in the head, knocking her unconscious. At this point, Gertrude told Ricky Hobbs that he had to get rid of Sylvia. Ricky later stated he believed that they were going to dump her in the woods somewhere to die. On October 25th, Sylvia tried to escape after hearing Gertrude's plan to abandon her. But sadly, Sylvia was caught, beaten with a curtain rod, and dragged back to the basement unconscious. That night, Sylvia screamed for help and hit the walls. A neighbor actually heard, but this neighbor decided to do You guessed it, nothing, when the noises stopped around 3 a.m. By the morning, Sylvia couldn't speak or even move properly. Gertrude tried feeding her but threw her down when she couldn't swallow. Sylvia was delirious and she was unable to recite the alphabet or to even stand. That afternoon, Sylvia's attackers gathered as she weakly tried pointing them out by name before Gertrude shouted at her. Sylvia noticed that her teeth felt loose, but Jenny said it was because her front tooth was knocked out when she was 7 years old. Jenny then left to earn some money. John Jr. sprayed Sylvia with a hose while laughing. When Sylvia tried to crawl out and she collapsed, Gertrude stomped on her head before looking at her body. At around 5:30 p.m., Richard returned and found Stephanie cleaning Sylvia's body. Stephanie and Richard bathed Sylvia and dressed her. Sylvia muttered about wanting her dead and for Stephanie to take her home. Sylvia Likens died on October 26, 1965, at the age of 16. Her official cause of death was a brain hemorrhage, malnutrition, and hypovolemic shock. Gertrude initially beat Sylvia's body, shouting at her to get up, but she panicked and she asked Richard to call the police. She claimed that she was looking after Sylvia and that she was mutilated by boys. Paula said that Sylvia's death was meant to happen. Gertrude forced Sylvia's sister Jenny to repeat her false story before Jenny whispered to the police that she would tell them the truth if they helped her escape. Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, John Jr., Coy, and Richard were arrested. Initially, Gertrude denied involvement, but she soon confessed that Paula and Coy did most of the abuse, and she forced Sylvia into the basement a few times for wetting the bed. So Gertrude here, she's actually blaming her children. Paula admitted to extensive brutality without remorse. John Jr. admitted to some abuse. 5 neighborhood kids who participated were also arrested, but they were released to their parents. The autopsy showed that Sylvia had over 150 wounds, burns, broken nails, peeled skin, a swollen vagina, and shredded lips from biting them. She died from a head blow, shock, and malnutrition. At Sylvia's funeral, over 100 mourners attended. The Reverend said that she suffered terribly in her final days. Sylvia was buried after the ceremony. In December 1965, Gertrude, Paula, John Jr., Richard, and Coy were indicted for murder. The charges against Stephanie were dropped when she agreed to testify against them. Psychiatrists found Gertrude, Paula, and John Jr. mentally fit to stand trial. Their joint trial began in 1966 with prosecutors seeking the death penalty. Deputy Coroner Charles Ellis testified to Sylvia's extreme suffering and shock. Jenny testified that all 5 defendants extensively abused Sylvia without provocation. Others testified that neighbor boys beat Sylvia, a minister failed to report her abuse, Gertrude carved obscenities into Sylvia, Richard helped with the carving, Gertrude sat crocheting during Sylvia's abuse. In her testimony, Gertrude denied responsibility and claimed ignorance of any abuse. Richard admitted to helping carve Sylvia but said that his role was small. There were many objections raised from the defendants and their lawyers, including motions to separate the trials, motions to dismiss charges against the juveniles, motions to change the venue due to media coverage, and other motions which were denied. Gertrude's defense was that she was sick and she was in bed throughout most of the time Sylvia lived in the home, and she was unaware of the abuse. She placed the blame for the abuse on her children, claiming that she was drugged with phenobarbital for her anxiety and unable to supervise the children. Her attorney claimed she was crazy despite their own experts failing to find her mentally unfit or insane. Paula's attorney defended her by stating that the extreme poverty the family lived in caused built-up resentment and anger. Sylvia was the unfortunate target of the anger, but he claimed that poverty was the real reason why Sylvia had been murdered. Johnny and Coy shared an attorney, and he presented the defense that Coy and Johnny were too young to be tried for murder and they were unable to accept their actions. Ricky Hobbs's defense centered around his mother, who died of cancer the same day as Sylvia died, and the influence of Gertrude over him. The attorneys for the boys claimed that the boys were guilty of assault but not murder. The defense team also criticized Jenny's failure to get Sylvia help. In his closing, the prosecutor said the defendants failed to leave Sylvia alone or to get her care. The defense gave sympathy appeals based on age and said that Gertrude was insane. After deliberating for 8 hours, Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Paula got second-degree murder and the 3 boys got manslaughter. But this is not all, because Gertrude's and Paula's convictions were later reversed due to the denial of change of venue and separate trials. Paula pled to manslaughter and Gertrude was again convicted of first-degree murder.
16-year-old Sylvia Likens was tortured to death by members of the Baniszewski family, with whom the child was staying while her parents worked with a traveling carnival. When the case broke, Paul Page was our anchorman, and the late Bob Hoover, our street reporter. The following is an excerpt from a 1965 newscast in which Bob Hoover spoke with Richard Hobb, who explained what he did to the girl.
All I did was right out that thing on her stomach, and then I hit her about 10 or 15 times.
How come?
Well, mostly because Gertie told me to.
Hoover then spoke to one of the Baniszewski children, who told him how the victim was treated.
She refused food. We tried to give her soup every once in a while and stuff like that, and she wouldn't take it.
Well, how about these scratch marks on her stomach? Who put them on her?
I did.
Why?
Well, Gertie just thought of it. She said, since you branded us, we're going to brand you. So she itched in with a pin, and I went over it. She showed me how to do it, and then I went over it. I did it.
Did you ever use any hot irons on her?
No. Yeah, that 3 on her stomach, I did half of that. And Shirley Ann did the other half.
Where'd the S come from?
What do you mean?
There's a big S branded on her stomach, right below one of her breasts.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, that's what you're talking about. Now, how about the inscription on there, I'm a prostitute and proud of it? Who put that on her?
I did.
Did you scratch it on her, paint it on there? How'd you do it?
Well, like I said before, Gertie wrote it down there with a pen, and I did the rest. She showed me how to do it. And
Had Gertie abused this girl?
yeah.
Gertrude Baniszewski, however, had a different story.
I just never beat that girl. Never. She was beat up on by other girls. In fact, my own daughter stopped her in the jaw and broke her wrist. And so, I mean, there you go. And girls around the neighborhood beat her up, bloodied her nose. One girl broke her nose, in fact, I think.
Were you ever in contact with the police on any of these occasions?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, in fact, I think if you talk to my daughters, I'd ask them to, the children's father and I are divorced. And he's a policeman in Beach Grove, or was. And I've asked the girls repeatedly to call their dad and ask them what to do. And in fact, I asked Jenny, I said, Jenny, and I told Sylvia, I said, Sylvia, I'm going to have to call the police or somebody because I can't have any responsibility.
But the police were called only one time, and according to Hobb,
Well, I come in and she come up from the basement, and we noticed she was cold and everything, so we carried her upstairs, give her a warm bath and artificial respiration. When she stopped breathing, we gave her a warm bath, and then she stopped breathing. So I gave her artificial respiration for about 10 minutes. And then I went and called the police.
by the time police found the girl, she had been dead some 8 to 12 hours.
In prison, Gertrude actually changed her name to Nadine van Vossen, which was her maiden name. Gertrude became a model prisoner and then mother to young inmates. In 1976, she was denied parole, but she told reporters that she just loved being in prison because she got a nice bed, meals, and TV access. In 1985, however, she was granted parole despite an outpouring of victim rights advocates protesting her release. President Reagan was also contacted but stated he was powerless to affect the case. After 17 years in prison, she moved to Iowa and she died on January 16, 1990 of lung cancer without fully admitting guilt. Paula gave birth shortly before her conviction to a baby girl that she named Gertrude, but the baby was put up for adoption. By 1971, Paula had attempted to escape from prison once. However, she was granted a new trial based on appeals claiming the first trial jury was affected by a prejudicial atmosphere and that the defendants should have been tried separately. This time she chose to plead guilty to manslaughter and she was sentenced to between 2 and 21 years in prison. On December the 2nd, 1971, Paula escaped prison again, only to be recaptured on December the 20th of the same year. And unbelievably, she was granted parole in 1974. Paula lived in obscurity after parole, working as a school aide before being fired when her past was discovered. In 2012, Paula, who used the last name Pace, was fired after 14 years of service when an anonymous tip led the school to learn her true identity. Paula had changed her name and she lied about her criminal history on her job application in 1998. Richard, Coy, and John Jr. served just under 2 years before they were paroled. Richard died in 1972. Coy died in 2007 after a criminal life. John Jr. lived in obscurity and he died in 2005. The younger Baniszewski children were not charged and they were raised by their father. Dennis Wright Jr. was adopted by another family. Jenny Likens, Sylvia's sister, was left again by her parents, this time with a deputy prosecutor in Sylvia's murder case. This time, however, she was given a nice life and a stable home. She died in 2004 of a heart attack. A memorial for Sylvia was erected in Indianapolis in 2001. Her death is credited with strengthening Indiana's child abuse laws and advocacy. The Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center is officially dedicated to the memory of Sylvia Likens. Founded in 2010 in Lebanon, Indiana, and initially named the Boone County Child Advocacy Center, this non-profit organization was renamed in Sylvia's honor in 2016, with the executive director stating, "The most important thing that we can do is tell kids they are hurt and we are listening." This was something no one did for young Sylvia. Her family is thankful, though it doesn't have to be that way anymore. She did not die in vain. She died a horrific death, but because of that, we are hoping that another child can be saved. This Child Advocacy Center was formed with the objective to assist child victims of abuse and neglect, to minimize the ongoing traumatic effects experienced as a result of their ordeal, and to undertake a relentless pursuit to prevent child abuse in both Boone and Montgomery counties. Professionals at Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center work in concert with both law enforcement and the local Department of Children's Services. Staff also conduct forensic interviews and they provide assistance with legal procedures as well as mental and medical health referrals. In another very sad twist, Diana Bedwell, the older sister of Sylvia, was found stranded in the wilderness in 2015. She and her husband of 25 years got lost in the California backcountry and were stranded for 2 weeks. Her husband, who was a diabetic, died before Diana was rescued. The couple were listed as missing persons for 2 weeks. Sylvia Likens was only 16 years old when she was so brutally killed by those she trusted. Sylvia didn't deserve to die this way. She was confident, sweet, loving, friendly, and outgoing. It was said that her favorite song was 1,000 Stars and she loved the Beatles. And this, everyone, is the horrific story of Sylvia Likens, yet another child who, in my opinion, could have been saved only if somebody would have reported what was happening to her, because like we know from this video, her cries for help were ignored. Neighbors heard, but they decided to do nothing. The social worker decided to just not needing any further, verification. So yeah, I really do think that it could have been prevented if someone would have done something, like really done something. Thank you guys so much for staying with me. Please let me know what do you guys think in the comment section down below. For now, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!